Hey guys, this is Basketball Star 1130. I'm back with another video. Now, I've been wanting to touch on this topic for a while, but in light of recent events, it has come up even more in the forefront of my mind. And that is the New York Jets, more specifically, Zach Wilson and their quarterback situation. We're going to touch on a few main points here today. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So obviously the man in question here is second-year quarterback out of BYU for the New York Jets, Zach Wilson. Now, I don't think this is any oh my God, breaking news to anyone, but Zach Wilson's awful, and he doesn't deserve to be a starting quarterback in the NFL from what I'm seeing right now. And I'm going to say it, he could be one of the biggest busts in NFL history. Yes, I said it. Because as rookie, he was pretty awful. And somehow, he is even worse this season. Let's get into some stats, okay? This season, he missed the first 3 games due to an ankle injury. So Joe Flacco started. And to be honest, Joe Flacco looked better. Any quarterback that the Jets had, which we'll talk about another quarterback that they had for Thursday Night Football in a minute, but any quarterback has looked better than Zach Wilson that the Jets have thrown in there. Joe Flacco, Mike White, and the aforementioned guy that we'll talk about in a second here. But this season, Zach Wilson... His stats are, in the games he's played, he is completing 54.5% of his passes. A good starting quarterback in the NFL should be at least 64 to 66%. So that is very, very subpar. That might be an understatement. That's probably terrible. 1,688 passing yards. Again, that's pretty bad. 6 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. Yep, you heard that right. 6 TDs, 7 interceptions. When you have, no matter how many it is, when you have more interceptions than touchdowns, I don't care who you are, you don't deserve to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And it's not like he's thrown more than 10 touchdowns and 1 more pick. He's done 6 touchdowns and 1 more pick, being 7 interceptions on the season. Okay? And then not last night, depending when this video comes out, either last night or a couple days ago, whatever, on Thursday Night Football, this was Zach Wilson's stats. He was 9 of 18, which is exactly 50%. That's even worse than his season average of 54.5% of passes, which are both awful, but 50% is just completely unacceptable. 92 yards last night, 0 touchdowns, 1 interception. Again, 92 yards is okay, I guess, but when you have, again, he had 1 interception last night and 0 touchdowns. That's an issue. When you have more picks on the season than touchdowns, that's also an issue. When you have more picks, 1 more pick and 0 touchdowns in a game, that's especially an issue. And midway through the third quarter, I think Robert Saleh finally had enough. He benched Zach Wilson for a guy we will talk about now. That would be none other than practice squad hero Chris Streveler. And I literally mean that because he started the season. Joe Flacco was the starter for a few weeks. Zach Wilson was the backup. Mike White was the 3rd string. And Chris Streveler, who was the 4th string in the practice squad. Streveler was literally elevated just hours before the game Thursday night. And eventually, Robert Saleh, as I mentioned earlier, Robert Saleh had enough and seen enough of Zach Wilson. So Wilson was benched for Chris Streveler. Before I get into his stats, I just want to say, it's one thing for Zach Wilson to get benched for Mike White, and Mike White looks better. But when you get benched for a 4th string practice squad quarterback, there's no coming back from that for Zach Wilson. So anyway, let's get into Chris Streveler's stats from Thursday night, because in my opinion, when he was in there, it energized the offense, and he played better than Zach Wilson. Before we get into his personal stats, I just want to say the first 7 drives of Zach Wilson Thursday night against the Jaguars, Zach Wilson first 7 total offense was 78 yards of total offense, and on one drive, the drive Chris Streveler first came in for Zach Wilson, they had 84 yards. So 6 more yards in just one drive as opposed to 7 with Wilson. If that doesn't tell you something, then I don't know. Anyway, though, Chris Streveler's personal stats. Streveler last night against the Jags went 10 of 15, which translates to 67%. Much better. Miles better even. That's a whole 17 percentage mark better than Zach Wilson was Thursday night. And that's about that league average. 90 yards, he didn't have any touchdowns, but he also didn't turn the ball over at all. But where he really energized the offense was in the rushing game. He knew the lanes to take because he had 9 rushes for 54 yards, no touchdowns there. He didn't produce any touchdowns, but you could tell the offense was energized and moving. And again, I mentioned that stat about the first 7 drives, but just a second ago, as opposed to the Streveler drive, the offense was more energized, and you could tell, you could tell that even though they didn't score any touchdowns, that it felt more comfortable with Streveler. And Jets fans, I mean, I don't make fun of them for this or blame them for this. They were cheering when there was a 5-yard completion like it was the Super Bowl because they had not much to look forward to with Zach Wilson. Like I said before, there's no coming back from this. When you get benched for a 4th-string practice squad guy that was elevated just hours before the game, that's embarrassing. So, anyways, to wrap this video up, let's go ahead and talk about the future implication for the Jets at quarterback and as a whole team and their playoff chances. So, obviously, the New York Jets aren't going to make the playoffs this year in 2022. They weren't officially eliminated because of the loss, but for all intents and purposes, in my opinion, they're not going to make it because it dropped down per Next Gen Stats. They showed this in the broadcast. To even with a win, it was unlikely, but it dropped down to 9% with a loss, which they did. So they're not making the playoffs. But now moving on to the quarterback situation, Robert Saleh, he said this a couple times. He said after last night's game right away in his instant reaction post-game press conference, this isn't the last you'll see of him, referring to Zach Wilson, of course. I just think it's time to bury the hatchet, if you know what I mean, if you will. I think it's time to move on. Like, stop saying this isn't the last you'll see of him, because every time they go back to him, he's terrible, and then they put him Mike White, much better. But then they go back to Zach Wilson, but then they put in Chris Streveler, much better. Flacco, Streveler, White, anybody they put in there is better than Wilson. So I think they need to find a quarterback this offseason, but not through the draft, because they've had 2 whiffs so far. Even though it was a different regime back then, totally different coaching staff. In 2018, they drafted Sam Darnold in the top 5, and that didn't work out because now he's on the Panthers, and he's still not doing that good. So he was a bust for them. And they drafted Zach Wilson number 2 overall, which they probably should have taken Justin Fields. But that's here nor there. My point is, I don't think they can draft a quarterback again. I don't think they should or will. Well, they might, but I don't think they should because I know it's really enticing to trade off for C.J. Stroud if he's not taking that number 1 overall by the Texans or whoever else is up there in the top 5. That's enticing. But I would go after a big fish like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, some veteran guy to hold you over. If they don't get any of those, Mike White's perfectly fine, serviceable for next year, and then draft a quarterback next year, like maybe Caleb Williams, Quinn Ewers, someone like that. So, to conclude this video, Zach Wilson's awful. We all know that, but in light of recent events, in light of the Thursday Night Football games against the Jaguars, like I said, all my main points have been laid out here. I hope you agree with me, and most of you probably do, but let me know down in the comments below what you think, guys. Thank you for listening to this video. Thank you for listening to this discussion about New York Jets, Zach Wilson, on their whole court QB situation. Anyways, guys, this is Basketball Star 1130. I will see you in the next one. Take care.